Hi, everybody. Welcome to Beyond the Bay Live. Beyond the Bay Live is part of the Bay Theater's activities is in Suttons Bay, Michigan. We are a nonprofit theater that is operated by the Bay Community Theater Organization. I'm Larry. I'm the host and moderator. And tonight we are going to be talking about the picture, the classic screwball comedy, The Lady Eve, with Barbara Stanwyck and Henry Fonda. And joining us tonight are going to be three panelists with us. First off is going to be our film historian, Ted Kroll. Ted, thank you very much for being here today. Next on the list is Rita Wessels, our programming team member. Thank you very much for being here today, Rita. And next is a film professional, and the person that runs a top10filmlist.com is Kevin Maher. Thank you for being here again today, Ted. For Kevin, thank you very much. So, and behind the scenes with us is White Fang. White Fang has come out of retirement and is joining us backstage to monitor all the commentary and everything else. So we're going to put her back in the backstage area there for her to help us out with comments and questions from the audience. So thank you very much. So what we're going to be doing tonight is we're going to be discussing the film The Lady Eve. And what we'd like to do is be able to listen to your comments, look what you have to comment on it when we incorporate that into the discussion, as long as also for you to ask questions from us about the film. And therefore, we can go ahead and we'll answer some of those, as many as we can during the day. But otherwise, we will discuss the film. And how to comment is if you look on your screen, you look on the bottom of your screen, there's like a comment area, or if it's on the side of your screen, it could be that side or it could be that side. That's a comment area. It's called a chat area. You just go in there. We can monitor that, put your comments up on the screen or questions on the screen. We'd really appreciate that very much. So to get us started, White Fang, can we have our first question? What makes The Lady Eve an example of screwball comedy? Ted, why don't you start us out with that?
Well, it's got crazy stuff that goes on in it. But I mean, the plot is Barbara Stanwyck trying to get Henry Fonda, and it turns around that he rejects her at one point, and then she takes on another role to bring him back. And in the meantime, he falls on his face several times, and there's a whole cast of characters that come along and just support the main theme, and they're all doing kind of crazy little things along the way, and the dialogue, especially because it's a Preston Sturges film, the dialogue is especially kind of very funny, very witty, very fast, and that's another part of the screwball part of that, is that everything just zips along. And before you can realize what's going on, you're on to the next scene, and so you're going wabada 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 with this thing. So that's part of what it is.
Hi, Rita. So, what makes The Lady Eve an example of screwball comedy?
I agree with Ted's summary, and I think the main points are, again, the witty dialogue that goes very quickly. You really have to pay attention to it. Otherwise, you miss some of the best lines that are just zipping by. Some of the ridiculous silliness that happens, like the sight gags and pratfalls where you least expect them, and just kind of the ridiculousness of the situation where Barbara Stanwyck pretends to be two different people, yet Henry Fonda's character doesn't recognize that she is one and the same. And so it's just a lot of silliness that is quite entertaining throughout the story.
Okay. Kevin?
Well, yeah, I think that that Rita and Ted nailed it, but I think we had talked about this a couple weeks ago when we were talking about My Man Godfrey and screwball comedy in general. That they're really farces at their core, but nobody responded to the word farce, so they deemed them all screwball comedies. And I think with any good farce, there's the suspension of disbelief, and I think that's clearly evident here with Stanwyck playing the dual characters, but also some of the absurdities of the characters' behavior, the secondary characters in particular, that contribute to that necessity of suspension of disbelief. And I think it's a perfect example of that. And remember, this came out in 1941, so we're pretty late in the screwball comedy arc. It had peaked in the mid to early late 30s, and by 1941, to a large degree, it was over, save for the films of Preston Sturges. And Ted nailed it perfectly of why his films pretty uniquely were able to sustain the screwball comedy subgenre because of that witty dialogue. It adds another layer to the speed, the absurdity, and everything else that was going on. But that wittiness, that literate nature is so key to this one in particular. And I think that's what really paints it as one of the best examples of screwball comedy.
In every screwball comedy, it is there's a couple that that they're meant for each other, but for one reason or another they get separated, and then the sort of the whole plot is how on earth are they going to get back together again, and by the end they are back together again. So what it is it's just sort of a farcical romantic comedy, and this movie, like all Preston Sturges movies, in fact, just about every screwball comedy there's just this warm, humanistic feeling about men and women that are attracted to each other, and they just get along so well together. But the circumstances are one thing or another, and they're apart, but they can't stay apart.
That's a great point, Ted, because and that is true in screwball comedy, that it's sometimes there are people that are made fun of, and sometimes there's mean people. But I would be challenged to try and name a mean-spirited screwball comedy, in that the humor is always, to your point, warm and is underpinned by a steady, romantic struggle, but it's always good-natured. And that's why I enjoy screwball comedy so much, because it is that smart, quick, fast, and good-natured. And, nothing's wrong with a happy ending either, so...
And this is I'll just say one more thing. And I think Kevin mentioned this, and we got it from somebody else who said that it's the woman who's the smart one in it, and then she's always sort of manipulating what's going on. And so, you have Cary Grant in this movie, Henry Fonda. They sort of play the dupe, and they really don't know what's going on, and they're being played through the whole thing. And that's another part of a screwball comedy thing, is the man's really bewildered through the whole thing. And in this one, you got Barbara Stanwyck. Pardon me, Barbara Stanwyck. Just she's smart and she's sexy, and even though sometimes she comes across as being very vulnerable and sad in her loneliness, but she enjoys having the one-upmanship on Henry Fonda.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you talk about it, all three of you mentioned that it's not just about the main characters, it's everything around them. Everything around in this movie, what I think makes this movie rated, so it's still rated among one of the top 10 in a lot of people's lists as far as films go. And the reason why is because I think as well, is that it has a complete cast where cast members say lines. These extras are saying lines that become part of the comedy or part of the movement of the film. In addition to, as we'll talk about later, to the music and everything else, the whole package, the sight gags, everything else is all packaged together in such a fine vein that this stands out as probably one of the best screwball comedies ever made. Mm-hmm. So, all right, White Fang, do we have our second question here? The opening credits have an apple tree theme, and Jean drops an apple on Charles. Is this an Adam and Eve story? Rita, do you want us to talk on this?
Sure. So the theme with the apple, what brought my attention to it is then when I looked at publicity stills, there was a picture of Barbara Stanwyck dressed in her Lady Eve ball gown or evening dress with Henry Fonda in his dinner jacket, and there is an apple between them. But that scene is never actually in the film itself. That made me think about the Adam and Eve and apple story and how it's really reflected in the credits, which are very clever and entertaining. And then also I was trying to remember where in the movie is the apple, and it's at the very beginning when Jean drops the apple on Charles's head to get his attention. And yeah, you could say it's kind of an Adam and Eve story in that Jean tries to lead Charles astray. But in the end, she finds that she loves him, and so she's more protective of him until she gets, when she gets over that get back at him part. But yeah, kind of an Adam and Eve story. At least it's a good way to launch the Screwball Comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'd say Preston Sturges tries to throw everything in, and so part of the so it's sort of sophistication here is that, yeah, of course it's Adam and Eve. It's the old proverbial story of man and, from the very beginning, man and women struggling through this thing, and the woman tempting the man and that kind of thing. And then there, of course, there's the snakes that Henry Fonda is a snake, whatever the word is. They use the word a couple of times, and I can't. What a snake specialist. So there's a little craziness in this thing too. He's reading a book that says, "Are snakes necessary?" And that's another part of this movie, is that while it isn't overtly profane or lustful or anything like that, there's this all through the movie. There's this sexiness, and both of them have sexiness, and that's a great appeal of this movie, is that there's a great attraction between the two of them, and it's just really amazing how that plays through the whole film. It's sort of like they might not like each other at times, but they're always attracted to each other,
Right. Yeah.
All right. Anybody else? All right. So what about another question here? Thank you, White Fang.
Oh, here's another one. The Henry Fonda always has a fall, right? He always has pratfalls, so it's the fall of man, right? There we go.
The Adam and Eve story is related to the fall of man, the frailty of mankind. Okay. All right. Let's say, please talk about the short but impactful career of Preston Sturges. Who's the best on this one, Ted or Kevin? Ted?
Okay, I'll go. It's not that short. It was in Hollywood when he was. He had this 4 years of really great films, of like 7 films right in a row. But the decade before that, he was a screenwriter in Hollywood, and rather an influential one in some ways. He wrote this movie called The Power. Is it The Power and the Glory? I think that's what it is.
Yeah. Yes,
and that had flashbacks in it, and it had something. It had the feel of Citizen Kane in a way. Yeah, and actually they sold it as having narratage, as being a different kind of film. And then he made a couple of other really popular comedy films along the way. And so what happened was, he didn't like the way his scripts were being treated. He was a playwright too. And if you want to go back even further than that, his mother was a very bohemian type of woman who took him off to Paris and was very much involved with Isadora Duncan, and it had a cosmetics business. And so he was all over the place as a kid and a young man. And then he somehow got into playwriting, and then got to Hollywood, where he was successful. Okay, so at one point he wrote this screenplay called The Great McGinney, and he said, "I want to direct this film. I'll give you the screenplay if you let me direct it." And that's how he got started in 1940, I guess. And it was a good success. It was a big success, The Great McGinney. And then he made, because of that, he was able to make films right in a row. And there was just this incredible burst of creative energy that he made like 5 or 6 just masterpieces right in a row. And they're all similar in a lot of ways. The really sparky dialogue and the sophistication, but in many ways they're very different. They're just kind of variations on a theme in some way. And the other thing they have in common is that he has these characters. He's got this stock company of like 40 different characters that keep popping up in his movies, and they're all very funny and very witty, and that's a characteristic of that. So at some point, he ditched his he ditched his Paramount Studios and got involved with Howard Hughes. And that was sort of the downfall. He made a film called Mad Wednesday that got cut up in all different kinds of pieces. And then he got to make another film, which is really good, called The Unfaithfully Yours with Rex Harrison. And then it all kind of faded. Part of it had to do with alcoholism, and part of it had to do with just sort of his personality that he just kind of burned out. He had a restaurant in Hollywood that failed, and he just liked to spend his money, and he just made a couple other films. And then he died at being 60 years old in New York of a heart attack. So he died relatively young. So that's the part of it. And every one of his films is worth watching. Some are better than others, but it's just like nothing else in Hollywood or these 5 or 6 films that he made right in a row. There's just nothing like it. And the one other point I would make about it is that his films are all about America. They're very American, about America in that time, but just this feeling of individualism and different kinds of people getting along, and what's the line? I think Rita said the line is that about the bad girls, and they're bad. Good girls are sometimes bad, and bad girls are sometimes good, something like that. And that's the way his films are, is that all the characters are not just one thing or another. They're very very richly portrayed. Anyway, I've gone on and on. Kevin, you can fill in the detail or the blanks I put in there.
Well, someone once described Preston Sturges as 90% procrastination and 10% manic genius. And I think that sort of surmises not just his career, but his life. As Ted mentioned, yes, he was a playwright, but he wasn't a playwright until he was 29. It was the first time he put pen to paper. And it was only because he slowed down enough to when his appendix burst and he was in recuperation and decided, I think I'll write a play. His second play that he ever wrote was a huge Broadway hit. I think it was in 1930 or right around that period. He didn't start writing and directing until he was 40. And as Ted mentioned, there's really these 8 films that he made in 4 years, 7 of which are arguably all-time great classics. But when someone says a short career, I agree with Ted. He didn't have a short career, because had any other writer-director created these 7 films over the course of 25 years, they would have been called a genius and one of the greatest ever comedy writer-directors. It's only because he did it in 4 years that people think of his career as short. It's just amazingly energy packed into that such a short period of time that separates him. And it probably has a lot to do with the fact that there were only those 7 films and then a couple minor films afterwards. But that pace was wholly unsustainable and was never going to sustain itself. Yes, alcohol played a part in his dissipation. Yes, he had his restaurant, his nightclub, the Players, which drained both time and money from him. But he also had an engineering company that made diesel engines, and he sold diesel engines all throughout the 40s with I think it was called Sturgis Electronics or Sturgis Engineering or something like that. In his 20s, he ran his mother's makeup company, and he invented a kiss-proof lip covering in 1919 that was all the rage and sustained his mother's makeup company for 10 years based on the sales of that. So he was always doing something, but it was really so that he could lay around the rest of the time and not do anything. So there was these short bursts. So his film career is a perfect reflection of his life. It was a short burst of incredible work, surrounded by the 90% procrastination and ultimately dissipation with the alcohol. So
One aside from the work itself, the one thing he did allow for other directors, he was the first writer who directed his own script. And so people like Billy Wilder, and there's a whole bunch of others that
John
followed.
Huston.
But he was the first one who broke that wall
Mhm.
that was in Hollywood, because up to then the writers were just considered, I don't know, they were kind of downplayed, even though they were paid very well. If you see this movie Mank, you'll get that's now on Netflix, that you might get a sense of what a writer was like in that same period. But Sturges was different, and he wanted to direct his own films. And he wasn't a very visual director. He was a good. The camera is always in the right place at the right time. It's the pace and it's the dialogue that really makes the difference. Oh, and while we're talking about this stuff, apparently the way he wrote his films was he would act them out, and somebody would. You have a secretary there who would take down the dialogue. So he didn't slave off in an attic somewhere and type these things out. He actually acted out the whole movie, so that when he got on the set, it was already made, and he knew exactly what he wanted and how the pacing would be and all that kind of thing. So
it's funny because he, like Billy Wilder, was very, very insistent that the lines be spoken exactly how they were written, and there was no deviation. And Sturges would layer on that added element of acting them out. So not only was it the words, but the intonation and the flow of the dialogue was also insisted upon by Sturges. Now his sets were very friendly, so it wasn't dictatorially done, but he and Wilder both were very insistent that this is the line, say it how it's written. And Sturges would help him with, now say it exactly how it sounds when I say it as well.
And there's a lot of racy stuff in there, but my feeling probably is that because stuff happened so quickly on the screen, he got away with it, but also because he was successful, and so nobody was going to stop somebody who was making money for the studio. So that all happened up until one of his movies was didn't quite come up to snuff with the others. It's about painkillers in dentistry.
Yeah.
Yes.
The great moment.
The great moment. But it's not a bad movie. I liked the movie, but I could see where it was not very popular.
Well, one of the things too is that we should leave just a last note on this comment here. Unless Rita, do you have something to say on this? Or
Nope. Thank
all
you.
right, it's because the film was written and directed by Preston, and one of the big things about him is that, as kind of mentioned, is that he was open. He'd let people come in and out. But one of the keys I liked about this movie was that both Henry Fonda and Barbara Stanwyck would come and not go run back to their dressing rooms, but sit in the front and sit involved and be around the director while films were being shot. And very active. And you can see they're talking about the script, probably reading lines and probably making up things as they go along. From what I read, they did a lot of creative work as the movie was progressing. So I think that's just an open environment. It allows for everybody, and that feeling comes across in the movie and makes it contemporary. It's why I think this film does live on, because it feels contemporary. Ted?
Sturges wrote this movie for Stanwyck. Apparently a couple of years before, they talked about the fact that he was going to make a movie for her, and this is her first complete comic role. And they kind of pushed her up a level as far as things going on in her career in Hollywood too.
Well, if you've ever seen Remember the Night with Barbara Stanwyck and Fred MacMurray, which in my estimation is one of the best Christmas movies. Sturges wrote the screenplay for that, and Mitchell Leeson directed it, who was a very solid studio director. But that essentially was the last straw for Sturges, and that's when he, like Ted said, offered the Great McGinty for $1. But that's where he met Stanwyck and told her, as you just said, that I'm going to write a movie for you. And the two of them hit it off while making Remember the Night, and obviously it carried over to the Lady Eve as well.
Very good. All right, that was a good discussion on that question, guys and lady. So thank you very much. White Fang, do we have another question here? Has Preston Sturges had an impact on filmmakers working today? Have they borrowed from his style or used any of his storylines?
Well, I'm gonna cheat on this one because my favorite Sturges film is Sullivan's Travels, which came out in 42 or 43, I think.
Right after Lady Eve.
Right. So it's the next film. And within that film of a director who only directs comedies, and he doesn't think that he's adding value to society, and goes on the road and has this epiphany while he's struggling with everyday Americans and gets thrown on a chain gang, etc. Well, one of the movies that the director wanted to make was a movie, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And the Coen brothers took the germ of the idea that director says in Sullivan's Travels and turned it into Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?, which is a
Coen brother.
Homerific epic tale of travels and study, and travels and survival, that the Coen brothers borrowed heavily from Sturgis's style but more so his sensibility but they took the title Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? From Sullivan's Travels. So for smart filmmakers, they still do borrow from Sturges, but it's, as Ted, I think you said the other day, trying to mimic Sturges is nearly impossible. So, but that's my favorite example. So.
All right. We have another question, White Fang. Where does Barbara Stanwyck's performance as Lady Eve rank in her career? Rita, do you know anything about that?
No, I have to pass on this one because I'm not as familiar with her whole body of work.
Well, Stanwyck started off with Frank Capra in the early 30s and did a lot of kind of pretty interesting films. One was The Bitter Tea of Mystery. Yeah, where she plays a missionary's daughter or sister or something like that. Gets involved with a Chinese character, and then there's a movie called Babyface, where she's the daughter of a bartender, and she is, her father sells her out to men and that kind of thing. So she has a rather bad feeling towards men, and there's even a quote of Friedrich Nietzsche in there. And so she goes off to New York and sleeps her way to the top there. And then there's Stella Dallas, where she plays a mother who has a low class woman who marries a kind of an upper class man, and he dies, but her daughter still goes up and up, and then at the end, she has to stand outside the window while she sees her daughter getting married, and she can't be there with it. And that is just, my wife cannot see the end of that movie because it just breaks her up with her performance. And then there's this Remember the Night, and there's just a whole series. And then she did some Frank Capra movies. What was the one?
Meet John Doe.
Yeah. So she played these kind of sassy, I wouldn't call lower class, but working class. That would be more the way I would say. Mm-hmm. So women, and then when she got to Lady Eve, it popped up when she got to a sense of being higher class and glamour. There was some glamour in there. Her dresses and her wardrobe in this movie is extraordinary, and it kind of took her up to another level in Hollywood too. She was never seen as the Katharine Hepburn or a Betty Davis type, and so through the 40s she made 3 or 4 really brilliant films, and then she got older and got into some westerns, but she made 88 movies in her whole career, and there's just a whole variety there. But I would say what Lady Eve is, what it ranks is it's her great comedy film, it's her sexiest film, and it just in some ways, it shows a part of her that doesn't always show up in any of her other films. You can go with that.
Well,
Kevin.
I want to start at the top on Babyface, which is in 1932, and you soft sold it in that she sleeps her way to the top. It was made before the production code was enforced, which came in 1934, and she literally, and there's no equivocation about it. She sleeps with men all the way up the corporate ladder until she reaches the CEO's suite. And one of the interesting things about the movie is that one of the first men that she crawls over and sleeps with is a very young John Wayne in one of his first films. And Babyface is an amazing example of the pre-code filmmaking. But yeah, she did also make 5 films with Frank Capra. Frank Capra was desperately in love with Stanwyck. They made a film called The Miracle Women, which is based on Amy Temple. I can't think of her name. She's a famous preacher, radio preacher,
Woman.
Which was a brilliant film. So her career built during the 30s, as Ted mentioned. This sprung her to another level entirely. But then you had, right after in 1944, you had Double Indemnity, which then rocketed her to yet another layer. And at one point in the 40s, and I meant to check this date, she was the highest paid American woman, regardless of industry or profession. She was the highest paid. And one of the reasons why I think she's at the time wasn't necessarily viewed in the same way as Katharine Hepburn, who had 13, 15 Academy Award nominations, was because Stanwyck was an independent, and she did not tie herself down to long-term studio contracts. So she could pick and choose the films that she made. So she, after she escaped, and I say escaped from the Warner Brothers contract and the Columbia contracts that she had in the early 40s, or in the early 30s, excuse me, she did really bounce from studio to studio on either short-term deals or individual deals. And I like Peachy's, let's see, he's got here Ball of Fire, Double Indemnity, and Lady Eve. I might have a little different order there. I think Ball of Fire is a great comedy role as well, where she plays, to Ted's point, a sassy, burlesque performer who it's essentially a Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs story, and she's incredibly good in that. I think it's a Howard Hawks film, if I'm not mistaken. But you could throw in, Christmas in Connecticut, The Strange Loves of Martha Ivers, Clash by Night. Her career goes on, and I grew up on her on the Big Valley, so and the Thornbirds when I was much younger. So she in my estimation is the greatest of all time, and I think Lady Eve's that this film is definitely in her top 3 or 4.
Just 2 other things. Babyface was always known to be kind of a racy film, and about 10 years ago, somebody went to the Library of Congress and found the original version before they cut out parts of it. So there's this new version or the original version of Babyface that's even more extreme than the one that people were mostly known about, and it was one of the films that did cause this production code thing to go into business. And the other thing is, I think another reason is that she was not a big personality. Apparently, in her real life, she was somebody called her kind of mousy, actually. And so she wasn't really big for premieres, and she really liked what you see on the screen is the real her in some ways, but the part of when she wasn't on the screen, there really wasn't. She wasn't that dynamic a personality. So from what I understand,
Well, you touched on one of the great tragedies of American film. There is that during the pre-code era, so essentially 1930 to 1934, where Sadie, it was essentially a Katie bar the door. Anything went with sex and murder and even drugs in some point, all these different taboo elements. In 1934, when the production code came into strict enforcement, if a studio wanted to go back and re-release a popular movie from the pre-code era, they would hack it up, and either local censors would edit out what they didn't like, or the studio itself would revise it so that the production code administration, would approve it. And unfortunately, a lot of films, that edited version became what was then standard fare for that film. And, essentially when they all went on TV starting in the 50s, they left that production code approved film in circulation. And many films that were made in that 1930 to 34 range are only available in bastardized versions unless they were high profile enough that the studios have gone back and remastered them with the original version. And it's truly a tragedy because there's a lot of great, incredibly great films in that era that are no longer complete. So, and Babyface is one of the preeminent examples.
One of the things they cut out of Babyface was the reading of Friedrich Nietzsche. There's really
that would put the audience to sleep, wouldn't it? So
and we could talk about Babyface.
Well, we go back to this film here. We can go. We're going around. Well, good. So, White Fang, do we have another question here? Henry Fonda is known mostly for his dramatic roles. Did he appear in any more comedies? Rita?
I know he did a few more, but I don't have the titles at my fingertips. But I know he did a few more, but he is definitely more known for his dramatic roles. I think Ted or Kevin could fill in some of the titles for Henry Fonda's other comedies.
Well, Ted can correct me, but I think the first film that he and Stanwyck did together, which was The Mad Miss Manton, was one of his first comedies, because I think that was 37 or so. But if you then look at the rest of his career, I would then go all the way to It's Cheaper by the Dozen with Lucille Ball, I think in the 50s, 56, 57, maybe. I don't know the date on that. But there's really not a lot of, I guess Mr. Roberts is a comedy, but Fonda's not funny in it. So there's sprinkles in there, but really Fonda was a serious actor. And again, this is the difference between being a studio contract player and an independent. Is if a studio and he was at Fox for a very long time, if you're locked into a single studio, they will typecast you and keep you in that same role. So this film Lady Eve was made at Paramount, so it was on loan out, and Fonda was a very expensive loan out. But at Fox, he was in dramatic and melodramatic and historical epics, et cetera, and he wasn't given a lot of comedy. And in this film, he's a straight man. He's not the funny one, other than the pratfalls. But
it takes a straight man to do a good pratfall.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's perfect in this movie for that reason. I mean,
that's why it's a serious actor.
Play against all those good.
Well, about those pratfalls.
When you meet his father, Eugene Paulette, you just wonder, is that the real father? Eugene Paulette in this movie is so jolly and just takes things as they come, He immediately falls for Barbara Stanwyck. You just can't get enough of her,
I love how he enters the film singing, "Tomorrow we will be sober." As a brewer of Pike's Ale, that's the perfect attitude for a brewer of beer. Tomorrow we will be sober. So, Paulette's great.
All right. Any other comments on that? All right. We have another question, White Fang. Muggsy Murgatroyd has a fairly big part and seems very familiar. Did Preston Sturges often use the same actors in multiple movies? Rita, you're nodding your head. I'll give you a nod on this. Okay.
So Muggsy Murgatroyd is familiar, at least he was to me, because immediately I recognize Uncle Charlie from the television show My Three Sons, which I watched in reruns as a kid. And he still plays that kind of a gruff character as Uncle Charlie, as Murgatroyd was, still making sure everybody's is safe and doing what they're supposed to do. And Preston Sturges did have a core or a stock group of people that he liked to work with and used in his films. And we alluded to it earlier in the hour that many of the best witty lines are read or performed by the extra characters surrounding the two main characters, Jean and Charles. So that full company of people is really fleshes out the story and makes it more believable too when you see everybody participating, not just the rich and the elite at the top of the pyramid.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else?
Well, go ahead, Ted.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Well, I was just going to say that a lot of these actors are older, and Sturges borrowed most of them from where they had been sort of tired vaudevillians. So they were very good at playing types. In a short vaudeville skit, they could just come on and play a type. But then the difference here is that Sturges gave them incredible dialogue to immediately flesh out their character. So that was one way that he did it. He also allowed people that had specific looks to populate his films, because it was created a shorthand across his 8 films. So if you saw, especially with William Demarest, I mean, he's probably the senior and most popular of his stock company. But he played very similar roles in each of the things and created the shorthand of that character through the 7 roles, the 7 films. So I think that it's what we've talked about many times is there's a very fine line between a good film and a great film, and then even a finer line between a great film and what can become a classic. And filling in the nuances and shaping out each frame with these characters is what takes Sturges's films to classic and great status.
Yeah.
And the thing about all these little minor characters is they all have, they're very distinctive. I mean, they might have 1 or 2 lines of dialogue, but you remember them, and they all have a personality, and they're all, I would say almost lovable. They're all just warm, and you laugh at them, and you get there. Nobody's stepped on, and nobody's doing anything nasty to each other, and again, a lot of it has to do with, and the other part of it is, like you said, they came out of vaudeville, so these guys were, they're mostly men, I think. They all have this rhythm that they can do, and the shtick, and that just does not exist anymore. It just does not happen the way that happened back then, and you almost get the feeling these guys were just so happy to be in a movie and and be part of it. And again, I'll go back to the same thing: is that it's so these are American characters. That they're all very, very kind of familiar soldiers and bartenders, and there's this whole list of very just all kinds of characters like that you don't see. The film is swarming with people, and you don't see that so much in films. They usually are one.
Even though he wasn't part of the stock company, Charles Coburn, who plays the Colonel, Jean's father, he was one who he didn't start in films until he was 60 years old. So he was a vaudevillian. He was on Broadway, and his first film role, and I don't know the name of it, was when he was 60, and he went on to a 25-year film career starting at that point, and he played roles that ranged from very absurd comedies all the way into dramas, musicals. I think Gentlemen's Prefer Blonde. I think he's in that. He had this amazing career that didn't start until he was 60, but Sturges could find guys like that and slot them in. And he I think in this film he wears glasses, but he also wears a monocle, which was what he wore in everyday life. And he said, if you can see through one window pane, why would you need two? Was his attitude towards his monocle, because he really only had one bad eye. But it just like Ted said, it rounds every image out and fills it. So,
And one of the things I remember watching the films when I was young on TV.
We may be crooks, but we're never common.
Right.
That's another good.
Yes, he had a lot of good lines, and the thing is also all these characters had interesting lines. But what I remember you guys are bringing up is I remember watching old films, and I'd see what I loved is seeing the same actors that weren't the leads in different roles. Oh, I know him, and this is what the type of person he is, or this is what he does, and stuff like that. And I like that. That was kind of fun. You'd see these people doing it, just be like a whole troops of people coming and going in and out of movies, and that's something I don't think we have today. And that actually is good, where they have a whole cast of characters, get more involved, and have a lot of film, and they're actually saying lines that are really meaningful and part of the script. So
no, I mean there are filmmakers today that use stock companies. Wes Anderson does, the Coen brothers do, Quentin Tarantino does to some degree. So they still do that type of thing where they'll have actors play similar roles and carry through different films. So I think that comes from things that people like Sturges did back in the studio era. It's just more expensive now to have a stock cast.
Probably Bill Murray would fit into a Preston Sturges movie somewhere.
Yeah. Yes.
All right. Do we have anything more, White Fang? When Charles proposes to Eve, his horse begins to nuzzle him. What is the significance of this, Rita?
Well, I don't know if it's significance, but it's hints at a couple things. A little bit earlier in the film, the lady Eve talks about going out, weaving her web and capturing Charles's attention. And she talks about going out riding with the horses, and her horse will nuzzle her, and then she'll say to him, and then he'll propose. And then later, when they actually are horseback riding and they get off to take a look, it is Charles's horse that comes up and bumps him a couple times. And I think particularly when Charles is reciting the very same lines that he uses to woo the Lady Eve as he did to woo Jean on the ship. And one could imagine the horse is either saying, hey, get it on with it, ask her already, or let's get on with this and get back to the barn. But I find it very humorous that the horse keeps nudging him and pushing Charles while he's trying to have his big romantic moment with the Lady Eve.
That's it.
Yeah, I think that was really classic way of just involving everything, including the horse, All right.
And actually, I think in that picture you threw up there, you can see the horse even sort of looking sideways at when he's talking. And it like they said, they had to put something sticky on the back of his head to get the horse to consistently be bobbing at his head the whole scene. It's great.
Yeah, you wonder how trained it was, or how did they get that to do it? Because at one point early in the scene, when the first takes where they were doing it, early in the scene, the horse first comes up and bumps him a bit, and then Henry Fonda kind of laughs, and he brings the horse. He gets the reins and brings the horse back into, to hold on to it a bit. So, yeah. All right, we have another question there, Sherry. Barbara Stanwyck was always dressed to the nines. Who was her costume designer? Can we go with that one again, Rita?
Sure. The famous Edith Head.
Edith Head.
Yes. And if you watch carefully, Barbara Stanwyck never wears the same outfit twice, ever, throughout the film. Every scene is a different costume, and they're all fabulous, whether they're elegant or casual. There was a lot of detail and planning put into the costumes, and they're spectacular. They're just spectacular. It almost makes me want to see the film in color to see what these gowns and outfits really look like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, but the point is they're in black and white, and they are very much black and white costumes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're still stunning.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's some gold. I would think there's some gold in some of that stuff, but I mean, I think they're very much black and white costumes, and it's very effective that way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and Head said
Have you ever
about
seen
these.
the movie The Incredibles, that cartoon movie?
Yeah.
Mhm.
There's a character in there that's a little diminutive. I forget what her name is, but that character is based on Edith Head.
Yes. She has the same haircut and the same style glasses as photographs of Edith Head show.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's.
Well, and
I don't know what she looks like. See The Incredibles. What's that?
Well, and Head even said about the costumes that she made for Stanwyck in The Lady Eve, which were deliberately black and white to reflect her duplicitous character. So she did use a lot of blacks and whites, but Edith Head, who's still the most recognized woman by the Academy Awards with 8 wins, and I think she had 30 or 40 nominations. But she had actually one of my favorite quotes from anyone in film, but certainly from anyone with design in their background. And she said, "A dress should be tight enough to know they're a woman, but loose enough to know they're a lady." And if you look at all of her costumes in that light, it really, it really crystallizes what everything that Edith Head was about. So.
Yeah. I see one of our participants left a comment here. White Fang, I don't know if you could put that up on the screen for us, the last one from Linda.
There you go.
There's a featurette about Edith's designs.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah,
the pencil drawings and everything. It's great.
The amount of movies that she did design the costumes for, it's just it seems like every other movie you see, Edith Head has been doing the costuming design.
Yeah.
Well, that's because she was one of the house designers, right? So each studio had Adrian was at MGM, and each studio had their own house designer. But the key is that they would often be given credit for the wardrobes, for the costume design, but farm most of it out to secondary designers that were on their team. And one of the ways that you could tell if it was really Edith Head or if it was one of her designers was she would sign all of her pencil drawings of the costumes. Whereas if she didn't sign it, it was probably designed or at least finalized by one of her underlings. And she would, they would just give the credit, much like they did with sound and most of the other major technical categories. They would just give it to the head of the department, get credit for it in the
But we were talking about Stanwyck's career. I mean, I think part of the reason it took off, and it was because of the costumes and the fact that she looks so good in them. I mean, not only are they great dresses, but they're great dresses on her.
Yeah. Well, when I mentioned, and I guess I forgot to say this when we were talking about this being, where does Lady Eve fall in the Stanwyck career? And it is near the top, similar to Ball of Fire in particular, because it shows the incredible range that she had, where she can be hysterically funny, she can be incredibly sexy, she can be romantic, but she can also be mean. And that's what differentiated her, in my estimation, from any other actress, was that sort of that fourth thing, that she could be mean, but you still love her. Because, for me, some of the other actresses, and I'll just not deliberately, but single out Katharine Hepburn, sometimes her meanness became shrill. You would never call Barbara Stanwyck shrill. If she was mean, it would strike the fear of God in you. And I think that's why.
And sometimes you deserved it.
Yes, of course, yes. But she could, on the flip side of that, she could play incredibly vulnerable too. If you look at Sorry Wrong Number, for instance, she's largely hapless. But that to me is and this one in particular, the Lady Eve, shows that, where she's sexy, funny, mean, and hysterically funny. So
there's a sense of loneliness about her too. I can't put my finger on it, but there's that loneliness that comes up now and then too.
I mean, I think we mentioned this when her father comes and sits on her bed, and he starts dealing fives, right, where he's holding all the aces for his own hand, and she's sort of wistfully says that she thinks she's in love with this guy, and it is born of a loneliness of, I mean, she hangs out with two old men, right? She's traveling the world with two old men. Loneliness is a natural, but I think the way she portrays it is so, it's not offhanded, but it's sort of dreamy. Like I dream of this something better. So yeah, I agree with you, Ted. I think there's a distinct loneliness in the character.
So let's go back a little bit and go to that scene where they're in her bed. Is it his bedroom or her bedroom? At any rate, and they're on the couch, and he falls off the couch, and then there's this two shot that goes on for 3 minutes, and they're talking to each other, and she's putting his fingers in. There we go. Yeah. She's putting her fingers in his hair and all that kind of thing. But and the great part is where he pulls down her dress over her leg. But there's something outside of that has nothing to do with the dialogue or what they're doing. There's some sort of the feeling of two people falling in love with each other or really being attracted to each other, and then it's beyond the dialogue. It's beyond anything, and it goes on for 3 minutes. It's just it's one of, for my mind, it's one of the most sexiest things in Hollywood movie.
Well, just you could never get away with the dress that high up a woman's leg in a drama or a melodrama. Only in comedy could even that piece be in that scene. But I agree with you completely, because they don't look at each other during that whole dialogue. And as they move towards the end of it, they're both talking about fantasy with their eyes closed in almost the throes of sexual whatever. And because the dialogue is so witty and there's enough distraction in the frame, right? The whole messing with his hair, the whole thing, there's distractions that allow for Sturges to push the dialogue in a very sexual manner, but still get it by the censors. And the last line in that scene, or one of the last lines anyway, is Stanwyck says, I'm so relaxed, I'm going to be able to sleep tonight. And Fonda says, well, at least one of us will be able to. Of course, intimating that he's going to be up all night because he's sexually charged. Well, that's not allowed in the production code era.
But a comedy.
He gets away with it. Right?
It's a comedy.
Right. It's comedy, right? That's you can push it.
It took a couple hours for them to get that together, two of them. And then when they finally did it, it was like one take. When they had the camera rolling, they did it in one take, and everyone was just amazed at how it worked that way. But
all right.
They would break up. Okay.
All right. Yeah. So we're running out of time. We're back down now. White Fang, we want to thank everybody for participating, but we have one last question, the very last question there. We'd like you guys to discuss this. We'd like also the audience members to think about this if you're live now or if you're watching this video later. We would like you to think about what would be the next Preston Sturges film you would watch. What would be the next Preston Sturges film you would watch? Let's start with Ted. What would be the next one you watch?
The Miracle of what is it? The Miracle of
Morgan's Creek.
Yeah, that's it's just Betty Hutton is just so high strung in that movie, and she's out she's out to have a good time. And finds a good time and gets pregnant, and it just goes from there. I mean, it's just and William Demarest is her father, I think, in that, and he's the local cop. Anyway, that's the one I would go. Good. But all of them are great.
What about you, Kevin?
Well, if anyone is so inclined, you can go to top10filmlist.com, because there is a list of my favorite top 10 Preston Sturges films. And I've already mentioned Sullivan's Travels, which is in my top 10 favorite all-time films. But the one I'll mention now is The Palm Beach Story with Joel McCrea and Claudette Colbert, which takes Sturges's zaniness to 11. It blows any other mayhem film of his out of the water, and it's pure genius. The Palm Beach Story is every bit as good as anything he did. So.
Oh, good. And Rita, what would you watch?
I think I'm going to refer to Kevin and Ted's recommendations and look at Kevin's top 10 film list.
That's a good idea
Thank
for
you,
everybody
Rita.
watching.
And go for
So-
yours. That's
So,
his lesser known ones, but that's got some amazing stuff in it too.
Yeah.
Yes.
well, we need to wrap this up now, and we'd like to say thank you to everybody that's been participating tonight live with us. We also like to thank all of you who have watch this as a live recorded video later. And we also like to say thank you to all our subscribers. Our subscribers have been increasing, but we'd like you, if you like watching us and getting notifications about what we're doing and what we're putting on YouTube, please subscribe to the Bay Theater YouTube channel. There's a little red button when you go to thebaytheater.com. You hit subscribe, and then once you subscribe, turn off notifications, and you get notified every time we post a video or any kind of message we want to send to you. So thank you very much for doing that. And we want to let you know we're going to be back in 2 weeks from now. Again, 2 weeks from now, we're going to be back. And what we're going to be doing is we're covering what we missed in 2020, meaning weren't able to show these films in the theater. Either they were closed or they went right to streaming. But selected films, 2020 films, both good and maybe not so good. Maybe give you a little warning on some. All right. So we'd like you to come and join the discussion. It'll be online discussion at 7:30 again, like tonight, on Tuesday, March 9th. And also again on Tuesday, March 23rd, we'll have the films selected and presented to you at that time. So thank you very much for coming today. We hope to see you in 2 weeks. And thank you, Ted. Thank you, Kevin. And thank you, Rita. We appreciate everybody. And have a good evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.